Story 16, The Mapmaker of Alexandria. In the great city of Alexandria, where the sea kissed marble harbors and scrolls outnumbered soldiers, there lived a quiet man named Dorian. He was not a philosopher, though he read philosophy. He was not a sailor, though he traced every coastline by memory. Dorian was a mapmaker. His home overlooked the eastern port, tucked beneath a worn aqueduct. The smell of salt and ink filled the small room where he worked. Dozens of parchment sheets fluttered from wall hooks, each bearing a coastline, a river, a range of imagined hills. His table was long and scarred with compass points, its surface cluttered with faded quills, dried inks, and tiny stones used as paperweights. Dorian rarely left his room during the day. The world was too loud, too chaotic. Instead, he listened to it from above, seated on the balcony that overlooked the harbor. There, every night, he watched ships come and go, from Crete, from Carthage, from the Aegean Isles. They came bearing wine, spices, scrolls, and whispers. It was not the goods that interested him. It was the journeys. He spent his nights tracing those imagined voyages. One scroll held only dotted lines, like a trail of dreams across parchment. Another showed a sea shaped like a sleeping lion, its base curled like paws. He would stare at these for hours, whispering the names of places he'd never seen but felt he knew: Rakotis, Thonis, Taphosiris, and the coast of the Blessed. He was not alone in his devotion. His closest companion was a cat, grey and sleek, named Ashai. She would curl atop his ink-stained robe as he sketched, purring softly like a boat drifting on still water. Some nights, Dorian imagined the world as a single thread, winding through ports, climbing mountains, curling through deserts and forests, and it was his task to untangle it gently, lay it flat, and name its turns. One evening, a knock interrupted his solitude. At his door stood a courier, a boy with sand in his hair and a wax-sealed scroll. Dorian opened it and read the mark, the Royal Library. He had been summoned. He followed the courier through the lamplit streets of Alexandria. The city glowed gold, its streets murmuring with traders and scholars. They passed under stone archways, past statues of Isis and Hermes, until at last they stood before the great doors of the library. Inside, he was greeted by the chief librarian, an old woman named Altia, whose eyes seemed to have seen every age. "You are the last," she said simply. "The last to chart what cannot be found." She led him to a chamber he had never seen, a domed observatory filled with incomplete maps. Half-drawn islands. Arrows leading into mist. One map ended in a question mark. "These are places dreamt," she said. "Stories told in the spaces between silence. We want you to finish them." Dorian said nothing. He simply took the first map in his hands and nodded. He worked through the night, and the next, and the next. He did not sleep. He drank clove tea, wrapped himself in a wool shawl, and entered the flow of creation. Each map became more detailed, more poetic. He didn't draw borders, he sketched feelings. Hope shaped a bay. Fear bent a coastline. Curiosity carved a river delta. Altia visited rarely, leaving food and candles. He often spoke aloud to Ashai, who curled beside the compass. "The world isn't made of land," he'd whisper. "It's made of longing." Days turned to weeks. One night, under a red moon, Dorian fell asleep on his maps. He dreamed of sailing on a ship made of papyrus, through an ocean of stars. The constellations whispered names to him, forgotten ports, uncharted isles, cities that shimmered on no map. When he woke, he inked them all. He continued until the last scroll was full. Then, he stood on the steps of the library and watched the sunrise. In his hands was the final map, not of the world, but of the soul. It had no legend, no title. Only symbols, winding like rivers through a forest of dreams. He handed it to Altia and said, "This is as close as I could get." She bowed. "You reached further than anyone before." Dorian walked back through the morning mist. When he returned to his home, Shai was waiting on the balcony. He sat beside her, unrolled a blank scroll, and began again, not because the world demanded it, but because the dream had not yet ended. "Now, rest. Let the lines of the map guide your breath. Let the sea carry you beyond its edge. The cartographer has lit a candle in the mist. Follow it." Story 17, The Stone Listener of Göbekli Tepe. Atop a gentle rise in the Anatolian plains, surrounded by golden grasses and cicada hum, stood the great stone rings of Göbekli Tepe, ancient before time remembered. Long before cities, long before script, people had come to this place to lift stones and watch the sky. And among them lived a boy named Halek. He was not a priest or a hunter. He did not carve or build. He listened. Each morning, Halek sat among the standing stones, the T-shaped monoliths carved with foxes, vultures, and scorpions, and placed his hands on their warm surfaces. He believed the stones spoke. Not in words, but in pressure, in pulse, in the shift of silence. He pressed his ear to them and waited. His tribe did not question this. Some said he had the ears of the sky people. Others said the wind had placed something inside him. Halek didn't know. He only knew that the stones pulled at him, like roots seeking water. He began marking what he heard, small lines etched into wood, arranged in spirals. He buried the pieces beneath cairns, as if planting meaning. He called them memory seeds. One dusk, as red light bled across the limestone, he felt a deep vibration through his chest while touching the tallest stone in the eastern ring. It wasn't thunder. It was a hum, like a breath being held. That night, he dreamed of the earth breathing. In the dream, the stones rose and walked in circles. People danced between them, arms painted with ash and ochre. A voice made of wind and bone said, "We mark the world so it remembers us." Halek woke before dawn and returned to the ring. For days, he fasted. He traced the carvings with his fingers. He watched the stars. He listened. He wrote nothing. Said nothing. Then came the thunder. Not from the sky, but from beneath, the deep shifting of something ancient. The next morning, one of the smaller stones had cracked, revealing inside a fossilized carving of a human face, mouth open. None had placed it there. The elders gathered. They lit a fire and fed it grain. Halek was silent, staring into the flames. He felt not fear but invitation. He spent the next year drawing the space between the stones, not just where they stood, but where they didn't. He mapped the negative. He began building small circles from twigs and bone, placing them in the fields. At the center of each, he sat and waited. More dreams came. He saw animals walk backward. Rivers climb hills. Fire speak without smoke. He saw the stones fall, not with violence, but with rest. He told no one. Years passed. The tribe moved. New people came. The ring was slowly buried. But Halek remained. On the final night of his life, he lay against the central pillar, fingers pressed to the carved fox. "Tell them we listened," he whispered. When they found him, he was smiling. His body was buried with a ring of stones around it. The wind still moves through them. Some say if you sit very still, press your palm to the earth, you can still hear the breath of the oldest stones. Story 18, The Sandwalker of Uba. There are cities built of stone, and cities built of dreams. Uba, they say, was both, a city of light and shadow on the edge of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, where no man lingers and no map dares draw lines. Some called it the Atlantis of the sands, others said it was cursed by heaven. But long before its disappearance, Uba breathed, and its breath was dust and incense. Kamar was born of no tribe. His mother was a spice seller, his father a man who vanished with the wind. Raised among travelers and storytellers, Kamar learned the desert not from books, but from sand between his toes. He had a gift, not for direction, but for listening. He could walk into the dunes and feel which way the silence bent. He became a sandwalker. Not a guide, not a merchant, not a prophet, just a man who carried messages across the silence. Between wells. Between ruins. Between cities that rose and fell between breaths. His pack was always light. A skin of water, a handful of dried figs, a bone needle and thread. But most important were his scroll tubes, hollow reeds sealed with wax. Within them lived the words of others, words too fragile to shout, too sacred for wind. The people of the south said he had sand in his blood. The people of the north said he walked like someone carrying time. He never argued. One year, during the month when the stars rose before the sun, a woman from the coast sought him out. She wore a cloak of seawool and a pendant shaped like a spiral. She said nothing as she handed him a tube sealed in obsidian wax. The only mark on it was a star split by a crescent blade. Kamar nodded once and began walking. He did not ask the way to Uba. He did not need to. The stories said Uba was always shifting, sometimes far, sometimes near, sometimes lost beneath illusion. But Kamar believed no city was truly lost, only waiting to be heard. He walked for days, pacing with the stars, measuring the angle of the wind. He slept under the ribs of petrified trees. He passed bones bleached white by sun and silence. At night, he dreamt of fireflies pulsing in the sand, and a door beneath a dune. On the sixth day, a storm came, not of wind, but of stillness. The desert held its breath. Kamar dug a trench and lay within it, his pack over his chest, whispering to the sand, "I am only passing through." In the dream that followed, he stood inside a city made of glass and smoke. People passed him without faces. A fountain gushed upward into the sky. And on the walls, a symbol, the same star split by the blade. When he awoke, the sand had moved. He climbed out, brushed off the sleep, and continued. On the 10th day, he found a cracked basin surrounded by black stones. Water once lived there, now only memory. Around it were broken statues, lions with wings, a man with a sun for a face, a woman holding a mirror to the stars. He sat among them and ate his last fig, watching the horizon. Then he walked east. On the 12th day, the air grew thick, though the sky was clear. The wind bent strangely, curling inward. And then he saw it. Pillars rising from the sand, half buried and leaning. Archways still intact. A gate with symbols carved into every surface, stars, moons, eyes, flames. This was no mirage. He walked through the silent streets. Stone steps worn by generations. Aqueducts dry but proud. Doors hanging on bronze hinges. The scent of something sweet lingered in the air, like resin burned long ago and never forgotten. At the center of the city stood a square. In its center, a well, sealed with a black slab. He approached it and Saturday. For hours, he waited. At twilight, a figure emerged. No footsteps. No sound. She wore a robe of linen and sand. Her face was veiled. She held nothing. She said nothing. But in her presence, Kamar felt the desert lean forward. He took the scroll from his pack and held it out. She reached, took it, turned, and vanished into the stone hallways without a sound. Kamar did not follow. Instead, he rose and placed a stone beside the well, smooth, round, marked with his own name. He whispered, delivered, and turned back into the wind. He never spoke of the message. Never returned to the city. But every night after, he drew in the sand a circle with a star inside it. He walked until his beard turned white and his steps slowed. When he died, they found him resting beneath a tamarisk tree, facing east. In his satchel were 30 scrolls. None opened. Each sealed in wax that shimmered faintly under the moon. And at the bottom, a stone, black, heavy, carved with a phrase in an unknown tongue. The scholars translated it centuries later. It read, "Some cities never vanish. They simply wait for a message." Story 19. The Bell-Keeper of Angkor. There is a silence found only in forgotten temples, not emptiness, but the breath of a place still listening. Deep within the Cambodian jungle, where ancient trees cradle stone towers in their roots, the temple city of Angkor once gleamed like gold at sunrise. Long before the jungle returned, before the pools stilled, and long before its name was whispered only by the wind, Angkor Wat was alive with rhythm, incense, and the low, timeless hum of the sacred bell. Sokha was the keeper of that bell. He had no lineage. No records said where he came from. The monks found him as a boy of 5, seated at the temple's western gate beneath the stone figure of Vishnu, cradling a broken bell in his hands. He did not cry. He did not speak. But when they asked his name, he simply pointed to the cracked metal and smiled. They gave him food, a cot, and space to be. Years passed. Sokha remained silent, not from injury or reluctance, but choice. He listened more than most. The monks grew used to his presence, sweeping the halls, placing lotus petals in bowls, sitting cross-legged beside the great bronze bell in the east courtyard. That bell was older than the monastery. Some said it came from a vanished kingdom. Others said it had never been cast by human hands. Its surface was covered in ancient Khmer script none could fully read, and when struck, it sang not like a bell but like a breath, long, resonant, and impossibly soft. The first time Sokha touched it, he wept. From then on, the bell was his. Every morning before the first prayer, Sokha would walk barefoot through the temple, collecting the dew that formed in the lotus pool. He would wash the bell's surface with it, not to clean it, but to remember. Then he'd sit beside it, legs folded, eyes closed, and simply be. Hours passed. Insects clicked in the trees. The sun drifted across the columns. The bell remained quiet, until it did not. Soccer did not strike it often. But when he did, it was never random. Once, in the dry season, he rang it 3 times at dawn. That evening, a caravan arrived from the coast, carrying a priest who had been lost for weeks. Another time, he rang it at midnight. By sunrise, a fevered monk collapsed at the altar, his body burning, and was saved by a wandering physician who had taken shelter at the monastery. The abbot once asked him how he knew. Soccer smiled and pointed to the bell. Then to his chest. The bell, he believed, did not mark time, it revealed it. When Soccer turned 20, he began crafting his own bells. Small ones, shaped from clay and bits of bronze wire, each tuned to a single note. He placed them in the trees, between shrine stones, along the garden paths. When wind passed through, they spoke. A music few could interpret, but none could forget. Visitors came from distant provinces to walk the grounds. Not to speak with Soccer, for they knew he did not answer, but to listen as he did. They left offerings, scrolls, carvings, bowls of rice, copper charms. Soccer accepted none of them. Only silence. He built a chamber for the great bell. Not of grandeur, but of stone and bamboo, shaded with banana leaves. There, the bell sat in near darkness, except during the hour of dusk, when sunlight filtered in and struck it like a soft blade of gold. That was when Soccer would ring it. Once. Only once. Then he would sit through the night and wait. And the dreams would come. He dreamed of forgotten kings. Of the jungle pulling memory back into the soil. Of stars arranging themselves in patterns that mirrored the stone floor beneath him. He dreamed of a city built on sound, walls humming, bridges ringing when walked upon, towers tuned to the wind. He awoke with tears on his cheeks. Each time. As he aged, Soccer grew quieter still. The monks aged around him. Some passed. Others left. But Soccer remained. The bell remained. One monsoon season, the rain fell harder than ever before. Floodwaters surged. The outer walls cracked. The monks gathered in the shrine to pray for safety. Soccer stood at the door, watching the storm. He turned and walked barefoot into the water, robe soaked, hair clinging to his skin. He entered the bell chamber, struck the bell once, and knelt. The sound that followed was different. Not loud. Not long. But heavy, like memory folding in on itself. The flood receded the next day. No one spoke of it. Soccer grew thinner. He ate less. He spoke to the bells now, in gesture and breath. The monks watched him place his clay bells higher in the trees, out of reach. He began to sketch symbols into the earth, circles within circles, waves that bent inward. Then one evening, he sat before the bell for the final time. He touched its rim, pressed his forehead to its body, then lay down beside it and exhaled. He did not rise. The monks lit incense. They rang the bell at dawn and again at dusk. It did not echo. Instead, a breeze stirred the bells in the trees. One by one, they answered, a sequence of notes, low to high, fading like mist. No stone was placed over Soccer. Only a small bell. Today, the jungle has returned. The temple lies hidden again. But those who wander too deep, travelers, dreamers, children with lost shoes, sometimes hear a single bell in the leaves. Not loud, not clear, but true. Story 20, The Ember Scribe of Hattusa. In the hill-bound heart of ancient Anatolia, where hawks circled basalt cliffs and stone lions stood watch at city gates, the Hittite capital of Hattusa rose like a citadel carved from the bones of the earth. Its walls stretched wide into the wind. Great courts rang with the sound of bronze-shod sandals. Fires burned day and night in temple hearths. And in the lowest chamber of the city's great temple, surrounded by soot and silence, lived a man known only as Oran. Oran was not a priest, though he served in the temple. He was not a soldier, though he knew war had built the city's bones. He was a scribe, but of a kind no scroll room recognized. Where others pressed styluses into damp clay, Oran wrote in fire. His chamber was small, round, half-lit by a single brazier. The air always smelled of cedar and ash. He lived surrounded by waxed wooden panels, charcoal sticks, smooth tiles, and bowls of oil. But he kept no shelves, no archive. Everything he wrote, every word, line, verse, he burned. The priests called him the Ember Scribe. He arrived in Hattusa as a boy, brought by traders who found him wandering alone beyond the broken edge of a northern village. He did not speak for weeks. But when asked his name, he took a stick and traced a spiral in the dust, the old symbol for smoke. The priests took him in. He became a servant, cleaning chambers, preparing ink. But late at night, they noticed he would sit near the hearth and sketch shapes into soot, circles, wings, broken arrows. At first they thought him playing. Then, when he was 12, he burned a wooden tablet with 7 words, "The wind returns. Do not build high." 2 days later, a sudden gale toppled scaffolding at the top of a temple tower. 3 workers were spared because they left to avoid the rising wind. The priests began watching him more closely. By 20, Oran was writing daily. He did not inscribe in Hittite or Akkadian. His symbols bent like rivers, curled like smoke, rose in short stacks like heat. No one could read them. No one tried. He wrote on wood panels with charcoal, then burned them each dusk. Not in haste, not in rage, but with careful ritual. He said the fire understood. Others mocked him, at first. But as the years passed, the mockery quieted. For strange things happened after his fire texts were burned. One winter, Oran burned a line that read, "The seeds dream early." The next week, fig trees bloomed out of season. Once, he burned a phrase during an eclipse, "The mouth will close before the blow." That same month, an enemy king died in his sleep the night before his planned invasion. The high priest himself began visiting Oran's chamber. "What do you hear?" he once asked. Oran, brushing soot from his palm, answered softly, "Not the gods. Just what they leave behind." The city came to accept his fire as part of its rhythm. And so, every evening, he would kneel before his brazier, hands blackened, and set flame to his day's words. He began crafting longer fire texts, whole panels inscribed with dozens of lines. They bore titles like "Treaty with the Dust," "How Iron Dreams," and "When Mountains Mourn." People asked what the stories meant. He only said, "They are already happening." He lived this way for decades. One summer, a drought choked the land. Wells ran dry. The priests offered sacrifices, but the sky remained clear. Oren wrote one word on a small stone: breathe. He set it atop the brazier and burned a thin panel of cedar etched with circles inside circles. The next dawn, the clouds broke. Rain fell for 5 days. Children began leaving him gifts: feathers, beads, flakes of gold. He arranged them in rings and wrote from their shapes. He built a spiral of black stones outside his chamber and sat within it, listening. One night, he dreamed of a tower falling upward into the stars. He burned a tablet titled, "When the Earth Remembers Sky." A month later, a tremor shook the western city wall, not enough to harm, just enough to remind. Toward the end of his life, he wrote less frequently. His hands ached. His hearing dimmed. But the fires never went out. He would sit in silence, watching the flame, as though listening for something deeper. Then came the final text. He began writing it at the winter solstice. Line by line. Night by night. He used oak charcoal. He mixed his ink with ash and river clay. The panel grew larger than any before. He ate only fruit. Slept only beside the fire. It took 31 nights to finish. The night he burned it, the chamber filled with heat, not searing, but dense. The flames swirled inward. The air shimmered. The shadows danced differently. A strange wind passed through the stone corridor outside, and all the lamps flickered. The next morning, Oren's chamber was empty. His robes lay folded beside the brazier. The ashes of the final text were perfectly square. On the wall, written in soot, one line remained. The fire does not destroy the story. It frees it. The priests sealed the room. The brazier, still warm, was left to burn out on its own. In time, Hattusa fell to ruin. But travelers who wandered its broken walls claimed they saw black spirals beneath moss. Some heard the faint crackle of flames in chambers where no torches burned. And sometimes, after sunset, wind rises from nowhere and carries the scent of cedar. And if you follow it, you may find a circle of black stones. Empty. Warm. Listening. Story 21. The Water Clock of Kolhat. Along the southeastern curve of the Arabian Peninsula, where the land tilts into the Arabian Sea and salt hangs heavy in the morning air, the city of Kolhat once glistened like pearl and fire. It was a place of commerce, song, prayer, and salt-stained stone, a city carved into the meeting place of cliff and current. Its harbor cradled ships from Zanzibar, Calicut, Hormuz, and beyond, while inland, spice sellers, poets, and pilgrims passed through sun-baked arches and narrow, tiled halls. The city thrived not only because of trade, but because of its rhythm. At the center of that rhythm stood a tower. And in that tower lived Layla. She was not a merchant, not a scholar, not a noblewoman, nor the daughter of any imam or council elder. Layla's father had once captained a dhow that crossed the Indian Ocean with cinnamon and coffee. Her mother taught her the uses of coral dust and rosewater. But it was Layla's ear that made her name echo through Kolhat's streets. From a young age, she noticed time not by shadows or the sun's arc, but by sound, the clink of water in pottery, the beat between bird calls, the way the ocean exhaled between each wave. While others listened to conversation, Layla listened to space between the words. At 12, she began carving clay bowls with notches inside the rim, each marking how long it would take to drain through a hole in the center. She filled them from the rooftop well and watched, counting her breaths. Over time, her timing became uncanny. She could predict a muezzin's call before he opened his mouth, name the moment a ship would dock without sight of the harbor. The city called it talent. She called it listening. She began building clepsydras, water clocks, in her small courtyard garden. At first, they were simple, one bowl draining into another. But over years, her designs grew complex, winding through fluted shells and polished copper tubes. Each one tuned to the sound it made, to the shape of its echo, to how the droplets struck stone. Layla didn't mark time in numbers. She measured how long it took for sunlight to cross a mosaic tile. How many drips between an opening prayer and a sunset bell. She called her units breaths, waves, silences, and arrivals. Eventually, her work drew the attention of the city's governor. At 25, she was offered the watchtower of Kolhat, a high, circular chamber of coral brick that overlooked the entire port. Traders had once used it to scout sails on the horizon. Layla turned it into an instrument. Inside the tower, she constructed her masterpiece, a great vertical water clock that used not weight or pressure, but sound. Water flowed from a central cistern into 7 large bowls, each feeding a tuned clay bell. As the hours passed, water would drip, strike, sing. Every note was different. Some high and brief like a chime of bone, others deep and soft, like the breath of the sea before dawn. The 9th-hour bell, tuned to the exact middle of the afternoon wind, was said to soothe even angry men. People began to organize their lives around its notes. Bread ovens were timed to the 7th chime. Letters delivered after the 3rd. The city, once governed by shadow and star, now moved in harmony with water. Layla kept no servants. She woke with the birds, gathered dew from the edges of leaves, adjusted her mechanisms by hand. Every morning, she tested each bowl, tuned each drip. If the wind shifted, she changed everything. Her records filled hundreds of scrolls, not with charts, but with lines like poetry. The 5th bowl grows impatient in dry heat. Clouds delay the 8th bell by 2 silences. Salt air sweetens the 6th note before dusk. She treated each sound as a prayer. And then the silence came. One year, after a bright and searing spring, the rains did not arrive. The aqueducts slowed. The gardens browned. Wells echoed empty. The city turned anxious. Ships began to skip Kolhat's port. The governor called for water from neighboring towns. But Layla did not panic. She had known. For months she had reduced the clock's intake, storing water in hidden cisterns. She had tuned the bells to strike softer, slower, holding the notes longer on less. Each day, she rationed the clock's life. And still, it sang. But it changed. The notes turned quieter, more mournful. The 9th bell rang with a delay. And one morning, the 7th bowl refused to strike at all. Layla listened and wept, not because the sound was gone, but because time had paused. She sat beside the clock and wrote her longest entry. When time runs dry, we return to listening. Then she did something no one expected. She opened the tower to the people. For days, visitors climbed the winding stairs, merchants, pilgrims, children with dust on their feet. They sat in silence, watching the clock drip. They cried when it rang. They bowed to its music. They brought jars of water to help it live. And Layla smiled, never speaking, but always listening. Then, one evening, she took a small bowl, the first she had ever carved as a child, and placed it at the foot of the clock. Into it, She poured the last of the tower's water. It struck once, clean and low. That night, she slept beneath the bell. When the rains came days later, people climbed the tower to tell her. But Layla was gone. Her robe lay folded beside the seventh bowl. Her journal rested open to a final page, with only these words. I was never keeping time. I was learning how to let it go. The water clock ran for 7 more years. Today, Gorhat is stone and wind and memory. But if you stand at the cliffs just before the 9th hour, and the wind is slow, and the sea holds still, you may hear a sound like water striking clay. One note. Just enough. Story 22, The Star Shepherd of Axum. In the green highlands of ancient Axum, where the earth rose in broad shoulders toward the sky and the stars seemed close enough to touch, there lived a boy named Tesfaye. His name meant my hope, and in the small stone village where he was born, hope was a quiet thing, passed between hands like warm bread, whispered like lullabies under woven grass roofs. Axum was once a kingdom of kings and obelisks, of carved stone palaces and ships that crossed the Red Sea under sails dyed with henna. It stood at the meeting point of deserts, rivers, and roads. Gold passed through it. So did silk, spices, and salt. But Tesfaye knew none of that. He knew only the stars. His father was a shepherd. His mother, a weaver of cloth so fine it shimmered in candlelight. They lived at the edge of the pastures, where wild thyme crept between the stones and hyenas laughed at dusk. From the time Tesfaye could walk, he followed his father out into the hills, where the sheep dotted the land like clouds and the sky stretched wide and unbroken above. While his father watched the sheep, Tesfaye watched the sky. He learned the seasons by the angle of the stars. He tracked the moon's leanings and the way Venus danced just before dawn. He began to think of the sky not as far, but near, like a map that opened each night above his head. And he believed the stars could speak, if only you knew how to listen. At 12, he built his first star staff, a tall wooden rod with notches carved along its length, each one aligned to a particular star's rise. He planted it outside their hut and sat beside it every night, whispering greetings as each light appeared. His mother laughed gently. You'll speak with the sky before you speak to girls. Tesfaye smiled and nodded. Years passed. His father aged. His mother's hands grew stiff. Tesfaye took over the flock. But at night, he still sat with his star staff, drawing lines in the dirt between constellations, humming to the rhythm of their motion. One autumn, when the barley was tall and the rains had been kind, a traveler came through the village, a merchant wrapped in indigo and dust. He saw Tesfaye studying the sky and asked, "Do you chart the heavens?" Tesfaye said nothing. He simply pointed at the stars, then traced a line through the sky with his hand. The merchant stayed 3 days. On the 4th morning, he left behind a gift, a leather scroll case filled with ancient star maps, drawn in languages Tesfaye could not read. But the shapes were familiar. The skies had not changed. That night, Tesfaye lit a small fire and laid the maps around him. He matched each diagram to the stars above, humming softly as he worked. He added new notches to his staff. He began keeping records, not just of stars, but of what happened beneath them. Rain fell beneath the shepherd's eye. A calf born as the moon's mirror rose. Smoke on the horizon when the lion's back gleamed red. He began to believe the stars weren't just watchers, they were reminders. Then came the night of fire. He awoke to shouting. From the ridge above, a line of torches flickered like angry stars. Raiders. His parents were rushed to the chapel. Tesfaye ran into the hills, driving the sheep ahead of him. He clutched the staff to his chest, his breath sharp with fear. By dawn, the village still stood. The raiders had turned back. But the staff had snapped. Tesfaye sat among the sheep, cradling the broken wood. He did not cry. He listened. And in the quiet, he heard a low hum, not from earth, but from above. That night, he gathered smooth stones from the river and built a circle on the highest hill. Around it, he planted 7 staffs, each cut from cedar, each carved with marks and names. He called them the Sky Herd. From then on, he tended them as he did his sheep. Each morning, he checked their shadows. Each night, he realigned them. He added chimes made of bronze and shell, so that when the wind moved, the circle sang, a harmony only the stars could understand. Soon, others noticed. Pilgrims began visiting his hill. Elders sat beside him in silence. Children brought him ink and papyrus. He became the Star Shepherd, not a title he chose, but one he accepted. He never spoke of omens, never predicted fate. But he told stories, of stars that wandered, of lights that returned, of nights when the sky seemed to pause. And he listened. On his final night, as his hands trembled and his breath slowed, Tesfaye asked to be taken to the hill. He sat in the circle, wrapped in a wool cloak, and looked to the sky. "I am ready," he whispered. Then, one by one, the chimes moved. A soft wind rose. The stars shimmered. And Tesfaye, the boy who watched the sky, leaned back and closed his eyes. The staff he held hummed once, then stilled. The villagers buried him at the hilltop, beneath the 7th staff. And still, when the stars are clear, and the wind carries low, you may hear the chimes of Axum, not loud, not bright, but steady. As if someone is still watching, still listening. Story 23, The Archivist of Carthage. Carthage stood where the sea dreamed of empire. A city of harbors and gold, of white towers and red sails, where merchants haggled in every tongue known to the wind. Its streets wound like veins through olive groves and courtyards, its libraries held secrets older than Rome. And deep within its temple of Tanit, past the great incense halls and tiled vaults, worked a woman named Samir, the city's quiet archivist. Samir was neither priestess nor scribe in the usual sense. Her name did not appear on any decree. She did not speak at council, nor lead ceremony. But she was entrusted with something more sacred than law, memory. She kept the city's breath on parchment. Not its battles, not its treaties, not its boasts, but its whispers. She recorded dreams spoken by children at the spring, the final words of sailors before long voyages, lullabies sung by vendors to their baskets of fruit. She wrote on thin sheets of cured flax, with ink made from crushed berries and copper salts. Her shelves were filled not with history, but with feeling. She called it the archive of moments. Each parchment bore only a few lines. A line of poetry. A weathered proverb. A question never answered. Some were anonymous. Others signed with symbols. A fish. A broken arrow. A handprint in red. Samir believed that the soul of Carthage was not in its grandeur, but in what its people remembered when they were quiet. She worked alone, in a round chamber lit by skylight, where sunbeams moved in a circle throughout the day like a sundial. She lit candles scented with cedar. She played small bells when tired, to wake the air. Her only companion was a raven with one white feather, who sat near the ceiling and croaked at sunset. Every evening, she walked the city, barefoot, wrapped in grey wool. She carried no ink, no scrolls, only her attention. She listened in courtyards, in gardens, in the shadows of bathhouses. She crouched by the harbor, hearing sailors murmur to the sea. She lingered beneath balconies, where women sang to the stars. By morning, she returned and wrote. Her archives were not shared, not read, not even shown to priests. She buried them in clay jars, sealed with wax, placed in alcoves hidden behind the temple's inner wall. She marked each jar with a single word, felt. Once, a general asked what she did in the temple. She replied, I remember the city that does not speak. Years passed. The city bloomed, then tensed. Rome pressed near. Whispers of war rippled through the merchant quarters. Samia continued her walks. Her scrolls changed, grew shorter, sharper. One read, the olive trees grow faster than our peace. Another, he kissed me like it was the last rain. The raven became restless. She began waking before dawn, writing by lamplight, her ink thick, her hand quick. She buried more jars. Then, one morning, the sky grew dark not with storm but sails. The siege began. Walls shook. Bells broke. Temples cracked. The streets filled with shouting. Samia did not run. She walked to the inner chamber, carrying her last scroll. It bore no words, only a thumbprint pressed in black ash. She placed it in the final jar and sealed it. Then she lit the small brazier at the heart of the chamber and sat beside it, eyes closed. When the fires reached the temple, they did not wake her. Years later, when Carthage was ash and bone, archaeologists found a narrow room behind the ruins of a great altar. Inside, dozens of jars sat untouched, sealed tight with ancient wax. The scrolls inside contained no dates, no names, only voices. I wish he had waited for spring. The figs were sweetest the day she left. We danced when no one watched. The scholars were confused, but the people who read them grew quiet. And some cried, though they didn't know why. Today, in the ruins of Carthage, if you sit near the old temple at dusk and close your eyes, you may hear a whisper, not a ghost, but a breath. The breath of a city remembering itself. Story 24. The Flame Reader of Ugarit. Long ago on the Levantine coast, where sea and sand met groves of fig and myrrh, the city of Ugarit pulsed with music and myth. It was a place of letters, not only carved into stone, but sung into the air and painted onto clay. Here, gods were named by thunder and grain, and every household knew the shape of language. In this city, under the eaves of the scribal school, lived a woman named Nima. She was not born of scribes. Her parents were potters who shaped their prayers from earth and ash. But Nima had a mind full of sound and story, and as a child, she would crouch beside the temple fires, watching the way flames danced when certain words were spoken aloud. By 7, she noticed that certain syllables made the fire lean. By 9, she could recite poems that caused a flame to ripple, or hold still, or twist as though listening. At 10, she whispered a lullaby beside a candle and the flame flared blue and then dimmed, not blown out, but quieted. She became known as the girl who read the fire. The scribes watched her, not with scorn, but curiosity. They invited her to the school not as a student, but as an observer. There, Nima learned to mix ink, to shape cuneiform symbols, to press stylus into damp clay. But she never stopped tending the fire. She lit her own brazier each morning. No one else was allowed to touch it. And every evening, she sat cross-legged beside it and spoke softly, not in full sentences, but in single sounds, single breaths. The flame flickered, tilted, mirrored her cadence. She began recording what she observed, not in letters, but in lines and curves. A single mark to represent the flame leaned east. A second mark for the flame spun without wind. These became her own script. She called it the fire tongue. As she aged, her reputation grew. People came to her not for prophecy, but for clarity. A woman unsure whether to marry would sit beside the flame and speak the name of her lover. If the flame bowed, she was comforted. If it snapped back, she reconsidered. Sailors offered coins for a reading before voyages. They did not always understand the result, but they trusted her silence. Nima never claimed to control the fire. She only listened. One season, a drought spread across the region. Crops withered. The temple altars burned low. The priests called for greater sacrifices. But Nima remained in her corner of the city, tending a single flame no larger than her palm. She fed it not with oil or wood, but with words. And still, it burned. During that season, she wrote her most important text, not onto clay, but onto long leaves cured and smoked, bound with woven bark. It held no grammar, no named gods. Only her fire script, page after page of flowing curves and notched lines. She titled it When the Flame Remembers. She buried it beneath her brazier. Then, one night, a messenger from the temple arrived. A vision had been seen. The gods were restless, demanding a new oracle. The priests asked her to speak beside the central fire. She refused. It does not speak in crowds, she said. They insisted. And so, under a sky crowded with stars and tension, Nima stood before the city's great brazier, taller than a man, fed by cedar and oak. She said nothing. She simply breathed. The fire shifted once, then flared upward. She raised her hands and whispered a sound none had heard before. The flame curved sideways, then straightened, then split into two distinct tongues, rising parallel. Gasps echoed through the temple. Nima turned and walked away. She returned to her chamber, fed her own small flame, and wrote a final line into the air with her fingers. That night, she died in her sleep. When the scribes searched her quarters, they found no tablets. Only the small brazier, still warm, and a sealed clay jar beneath it. Inside was her book, The Fire Tongue. The scholars tried to read it for centuries. None succeeded. But storytellers said if you placed the book near a flame, and read the lines aloud as smoke curled around you, you might feel something in your chest loosen. Not understanding, but recognition. Today, in the ruins of Ugarit, children sometimes leave candles in broken hearts. And if you sit long enough, the flame might lean, just slightly, in your direction. As if listening back. Story 25. The Oracle of the Shifting Dunes. Beyond the last well of the western frontier, where maps ended and wind reigned, there lay the shifting dunes, an endless ocean of sand that moved with the breath of the earth. There were no cities there. No parks. Only stories whispered from caravan to caravan, and among those stories, one name always returned, Zara, the Oracle of the Dunes. No one agreed on where she was born. Some said she had wandered out of the desert as a child with eyes full of stars and hands smelling of myrrh. Others said she was born of the sand itself, a spirit with breath and skin. But all agreed on one thing: she lived in the wind-shaped temple half buried by time and silence. The temple was not made by hands. Its walls rose like cliffs smoothed by rain. Its pillars stood crooked and spiraling, as if grown. Inside, the air was always cool. And in the center of its dome was a pool of still water, fed by nothing visible, surrounded by 12 carved stones, each marked with a symbol: flame, eye, wave, moon, seed, and more. Zara lived there, barefoot, robed in white cotton, her hair braided with strands of glass. She carried no books, no scrolls, no tools. But people came. They came from every edge of the desert: chieftains, pilgrims, grieving mothers, lost wanderers. They walked for days, following the dune lines or the flight of birds, chasing the stories that whispered, "She will know." Zara greeted none of them with speech. She would guide them to the pool, hand them a single stone from the circle, and wait. Then, kneeling across from them, she would dip her fingers into the water and begin to hum. The hum was not a song. It was a current, low, steady, shifting. It moved with the wind. And as it continued, the air around the visitor would seem to bend. Sand would settle. Heat would retreat. The water would ripple once. And something would rise from it, not a vision, not quite a reflection, but a pattern. One man saw his dead brother smiling beside a field of barley. A child saw stars falling in slow motion onto her open palms. A merchant saw a locked door with a key that floated just out of reach. Zara never explained what was seen. When the vision faded, she would press the chosen stone into the visitor's hand and nod toward the east, the way home. And that was all. But the visions lingered. Some left their fortunes behind. Others changed their names. A few returned years later, aged and weathered, simply to sit in silence beside the pool once more. Zara never aged. She still walked the perimeter of the temple at sunrise, humming softly to the dunes. She still placed small bowls of honey near the corners of the room. She still listened to the wind as if it whispered names. One night, a terrible sandstorm swept the region. Entire caravans were buried. Oases vanished. The stars were hidden for 5 nights. When the skies cleared, a group of nomads hurried to the temple, fearing Zara had been lost. They found the temple intact, the sand smoothed perfectly around its base. Inside, the pool shimmered. But Zara was gone. In her place sat a woman none recognized, her eyes closed, hands cupped around a single stone. She said nothing. She only hummed. The stone in her hands bore a new symbol, a spiral. The temple had chosen another. And so it continued. Even now, the temple cannot be found on purpose. It appears when needed. Some say it shifts beneath the dunes. Others say it waits, still and buried, until called. But if you find yourself lost in the desert, and you listen closely, you may hear a low hum beneath the wind. Follow it. And if you see 12 stones around a pool of still water, kneel. The vision will come. Story 26, the lantern maker of Bagan. In the wide plains of Bagan, where thousands of temples rise like sleeping giants from the earth, and golden spires catch the morning light, there once lived a lantern maker named Ananda. He did not live within the great monasteries. He did not chant the sutras or copy the scriptures. But every light that burned in the sacred grottos, every flickering flame that danced across the faces of stone Buddhas, had passed through his hands. Ananda was born beneath a Bodhi tree during the quiet hour between moonset and dawn. His mother said his first cry startled a candle into flame. Whether myth or truth, flame followed him. From a young age, he was drawn to fire, not for its heat or danger, but its motion. He would sit for hours watching it flicker behind colored silk, behind slats of carved bamboo, behind parchment painted with gold dust. While other children ran between the pagodas, Ananda folded paper into impossible shapes. By 12, he had mastered the craft of lanterns. Not just folding them, but listening to them. For him, every lantern was a breath, a shape that caught not only light but time. He began inscribing prayers onto the inside panels, tiny script written with brushes no thicker than a strand of hair. He called them hidden offerings. By adulthood, Ananda's lanterns hung in every temple in Bagan. He refused payment. Instead, he asked only one thing, that the lantern be lit not for ritual, but for remembrance. Not of gods, of people. Write a name, he would say. Then let it glow. Pilgrims came from the Irrawaddy River, from the jungle paths, from monastic caves in the cliffs, carrying names on their lips. Mothers lit lanterns for lost children. Monks lit lanterns for fallen comrades. Lovers lit lanterns for the ones they never met. Each night, Ananda walked through the temple fields barefoot, relighting any flame that had gone out. He whispered as he walked. Not prayers. Names. He believed the dead returned in light. One year, the rains came late. The river ran low. Crops withered. The air turned brittle with fear. The elders of the city summoned him. The gods are displeased, they said. We need lanterns of power, not memory. But Ananda refused. A lantern without memory is an empty shell. So they stopped requesting his work. Other craftsmen were hired, their lanterns more ornate, gilded, bright. But they did not glow the same way. They flickered oddly. They dimmed too soon. And in their silence, Ananda worked alone. He began making larger lanterns, ones taller than a man, shaped like lotuses, elephants, birds. Inside each was a secret chamber, just large enough to hold a folded piece of cloth, a lock of hair, a page torn from a letter. The offerings of memory. He hung these in a clearing behind his workshop, high in the tamarind trees. And when the wind moved, they swayed like spirits dancing between worlds. He stopped attending ceremonies. But pilgrims still came. Not in crowds. In ones and twos. They brought names. Stories. Tears. One brought a flute once played by her brother. Another brought a coin once held by her father. Ananda listened to each. Then built a lantern for them, lit it, and added it to the grove. Soon the trees were filled. And on the night of the full moon festival, when thousands gathered to release sky lanterns over the Irrawaddy, Ananda did something no one expected. He opened the grove. People entered in silence. They stood beneath the trees, listening. Some wept. Some sang. No one shouted. At midnight, he lit the final lantern. It bore no name. No mark. Just light. Then he turned, bowed, and walked into the forest. He did not return. The grove remained. The lanterns stayed lit for months. When the wind changed, they all dimmed at once. The monks called it a passing. But the pilgrims believed he became flame. Now, every year on the full moon, people still walk into the trees behind the temples. Some bring offerings. Some only bring breath. And when the wind stirs and the branches shift, the lanterns glow, one by one, as if someone is still walking below them, whispering names into the light. Story 27, The Marble Weaver of Knossos. On the island of Crete, where the sun rolls over white cliffs and the air smells of thyme and sea salt, there once stood a palace so vast it seemed to breathe. It was called Knossos, a labyrinth of painted halls, terraces laced with vines, and mosaics that glittered like water. Beneath its stone ceilings lived kings and queens, warriors and priests. But in the lowest chamber of all, past the goat courtyards and past the fresco of the dancing bull, worked a woman named Dion, who did not command armies or attend royal councils. She was a weaver of marble. Not statues. Not columns. But silence into stone. Her chamber was long and narrow, tucked into the foundations of the palace. It had no window, only slits near the ceiling where wind passed through like breath through a flute. By oil lamp and touch alone, Dion worked, smoothing, scoring, shaping slabs of pale marble with fingers trained not in strength, but in stillness. When she was a child, she had no words. Her father, a stonemason, taught her to listen to the marble instead. If it sings back when you touch it, he told her, then it remembers something. She began shaping small panels of stone, carving not figures, but patterns, spirals, threads, waves, circles within circles. She called them threads of memory. She believed each block of marble held a life it had once witnessed. And she was not sculpting, she was drawing it out. By her 30th year, the palace knew her name. Her panels lined the queen's meditation room. A spiral she carved was set into the base of the bull altar, said to calm the animal's rage. But Dion never sought recognition. She worked alone, in silence, each day weaving a new stone. She had no apprentices. No family. Only a small lyre she strummed softly when unsure of a piece's rhythm. She often played in the dark, letting the vibration guide her hand. People said she could shape dreams into stone. They were not wrong. Once, a child lost in the upper halls was found seated beside her, silent but smiling. When asked how she got there, the girl said, "The stone showed me." Dion nodded. She had been carving a pattern of a sleeping fox that day. She never left the palace. But she knew when ships arrived before the horns were blown. She knew when queens wept before tears hit the floor. The marble told her, through warmth, through weight, through song. One year, during a great storm, part of the upper chambers collapsed. Walls cracked. Columns split. The nobles panicked, fearing the labyrinth itself had turned. But Dion simply walked the halls. She placed her hands on the broken stones, closed her eyes, and hummed. Then she returned to her chamber and carved the largest panel she had ever attempted, nearly as tall as a man and wide as the hall. It took her 40 days. No one was allowed to see it until it was done. When at last it was carried up the broken steps and set into the cracked wall of the northern wing, the palace fell silent. It was a weaving of threads, twisting like vines, like rivers, like breath. but within them were shapes, a woman kneeling, a ship sailing backward, a bird mid-flight holding a drop of rain. The moment it was placed, the wall held. Engineers were baffled. The queen declared it divine. Dion returned to her chamber without a word. From then on, she was left alone, but her works were not. Pilgrims came from distant islands asking for woven stones. She never refused. But she never asked why. She simply shaped what the marble told her. A man mourning his wife received a panel of 2 hands not quite touching. A girl facing illness received one of a wave lifting a boat. A priest who had lost his voice received a spiral of sound waves, invisible to the eye, but present in the ridges. Each person wept. And Dion, always silent, only bowed. As she aged, her hands slowed. The tools grew heavy. But still she worked. Until, one spring, she placed her final panel in the center of her chamber, a simple loop of thread, neither beginning nor end. She lit a lamp, strummed her lyre once, and Saturday. She did not rise again. When they found her, the room was silent. The panel still warm. The queen ordered the chamber sealed, the flame left burning. Years later, when the palace fell to time and vine, travelers found strange panels beneath the ruins, marbled shapes that hummed softly when touched in silence. And sometimes, if you press your palm to the stone and listen, you might hear a soft chord. As if the marble remembers you, too. Story 28, The Pearl Listener of Lothal. Where the rivers met the sea in ancient Gujarat, in the bustling Harappan port of Lothal, merchants once filled their ledgers with jade and incense, and the air rang with the haggling of tongues from distant lands. But down the stone embankment from the warehouses and bead makers' quarters, there stood a quiet stall by the dock, no sign, no gold, only a curtain of shells swaying gently in the breeze. And behind it sat a girl named Myra, who listened to pearls. Not sold them. Listened to them. She had no claim of noble blood. Her father was a fisherman. Her mother died when she was 6. But Myra was born during a red tide, when the sky turned violet and the sea sang in strange tones. The midwife claimed she never cried, she only hummed. By the time she was 10, Myra wandered the shallows barefoot, collecting oyster shells long before the tide reached them. She opened them with care, using a shard of polished flint, never forcing a hinge. She whispered to them as she worked. And though many were empty, every so often a pearl would appear, soft, luminous, humming when held to the ear. People said she could hear which ones contained them before opening. She began keeping a basket of pearls, each tied to a colored thread. When visitors came, she would offer one, placing it in their palm, waiting until they pressed it to their ear. Some cried. Some laughed. Others simply nodded and walked away in silence. She never explained what they heard. The dock workers began calling her the Pearl Listener. Merchants, wary of superstition, dismissed her. But their wives came. Sailors came before journeys. Some even brought sick children, asking for a pearl that might comfort them. Myra asked for nothing in return. Except one thing, a story. Each time she gave a pearl, she requested a story in return. It could be a dream, a fear, a memory. It didn't matter. She whispered them to the basket when no one watched. Then tied each pearl with a thread the color of the voice. She said it helped the pearl know who it was for. One day, A man arrived, cloaked in black linen, bearing a cane made from carved bone. He did not speak until sunset. "I have no story," he said. "Then I cannot give you a pearl," Myra replied. He stared at her for a long time, then removed a ring from his finger, silver, inlaid with a broken gemstone. "This is all I have," he said. Myra nodded. She placed a pearl in his hand. He did not speak again. He walked into the sea. No body was found. The next day, Myra placed the ring in a shell and set it afloat on the tide. Years passed. Myra grew older, but never left the dock. The city grew louder. Trade flourished. New walls were built. But her stall remained, quiet, draped in shells, visited by those who needed silence more than goods. One monsoon, the rains did not stop. The river swelled. The dock began to flood. The merchants panicked. Boats were pulled inland. People fled inland. But Myra stayed. When the flood reached her knees, she opened her basket of pearls and whispered each name she remembered. One by one, she tied them to thin reeds and set them afloat. They drifted into the current, vanishing downriver. When the waters receded, her stall was gone. Only the shell curtain remained, tangled in driftwood. No one saw Myra again. But soon after, pearls began appearing on the banks miles away, in baskets, in tide pools, in the mouths of broken amphorae. Each one strung on thread. Each one humming faintly. Those who held them swore they heard a voice, familiar, soft, saying only what they most needed to hear. And even now, in the ruins of Lothal, when the tide is low and the wind blows in from the sea, you may find a single pearl resting in the mud. Lift it. Listen. She's still there. Story 29, The Stone Gardener of Tiahuanaco. High on the Altiplano of the Andes, where the air is thin and the horizon feels close enough to touch, there once stood the city of Tiahuanaco, a city of great monoliths and sun gates, of stone blocks shaped so precisely they seemed grown, not carved. Most knew it as a place of kings, of astronomers, of gods carved in granite. But in the farthest corner of the site, just beyond the shadow of the Kalasasaya temple wall, lived a man with no title, no followers, and no name carved in stone. They called him the Stone Gardener. His true name was lost to time. Some said he was born during a lunar eclipse. Others said he had come from a lake village far below the mountains, walking barefoot with only a satchel of seeds and a carving knife. But when the high priests found him chiseling spirals into broken blocks near the city's edge, they almost exiled him for defacing sacred stone. He said only this, "I am not carving. I am watering." Intrigued, they let him stay. And so he remained, working in silence, year after year, stone after stone, in a courtyard of cracked foundations and weeds. He carried no tools but a chisel, a small copper hammer, and a pouch of seeds, not to eat, but to place beside the stones. Every morning, he walked among the scattered monoliths, touching each one with bare hands, listening as the cold stone warmed beneath the sun. Then he chose one. He would work in slow circles, never carving images of gods or animals, but deep channels, delicate grooves, curves like vines, marks that seemed to trace wind and time rather than anything tangible. People laughed. "Stones do not grow." He answered, "Not yet." As he worked, he sang. The melodies had no words, only sounds that changed with the altitude, the humidity, the tilt of the sun. He claimed that stones remembered these songs, and that one day, they would sing back. By the time he was 30, a small grove of carved stones had formed around his hut, each one grooved with patterns so fluid they seemed to shimmer in moonlight. He never arranged them by size or shape, but by tone. When the wind passed through them, it made music. One solstice, a priest wandered into the grove and paused. The wind had shifted. And for a brief moment, it seemed the stones were whispering to each other, not loudly, but with intent. The priest fell to his knees. From then on, the high elders no longer mocked him. They brought him broken stones from collapsed walls. They asked him to tune the monoliths near the water channels. He refused payment. He asked only for time. Time and silence. He believed each stone held a memory of the earth, not written, but waiting. His work, he said, was not to teach the stone anything, but to help it remember. He carved only by sun. Never under cloud. Never under moon. And he never repeated a pattern. Once, a child brought him a cracked tile from her father's hearth and asked if he could fix it. He didn't. He planted it in the ground, carved a spiral in its center, and left a single flower atop it. It will tell stories better now, he said. As the years passed, his grove grew. Travelers came not to worship, but to walk through it. Some claimed they dreamed more clearly after hearing the stones hum. Others said they saw visions when the wind moved just right, of rivers flowing backward, of mountains folding like paper, of stars singing in colors. He never confirmed or denied these stories. Then, one morning, he woke before the sun, carved a final spiral, so deep and wide it circled the entire largest stone in his grove, and lay down beside it. He hummed one long note, and never rose again. When they found him, the wind had stilled. Not a leaf moved. The birds were silent. The elders gathered. They poured offerings of cornmeal and water around the stone, but none touched it. The next day, a vine sprouted in the center of the spiral. It grew. Within months, the stone bloomed, covered in red trumpet flowers, fed only by wind and stone dust. No one could explain it. The grove was sealed. Not with walls. With silence. Now, in the ruins of Tiahuanaco, past the carved sun gate and beneath the eagle's perch, if you find yourself in a quiet hollow where stones curve like roots, stop. Breathe. And if the wind is soft enough, the stones might hum, not for you, but through you. Story 30, The Bone Flute of Göbekli. Before the wheel, before writing, before cities had names, a ring of stone stood upon a hill in what would one day be called Anatolia. Tall, T-shaped pillars carved with foxes, vultures, lions, and snakes, set not randomly, but in quiet ceremony. Göbekli, they would call it later. But back then, it was simply the circle. A gathering place for memory. A calendar of silence. And among the many who came, the firekeepers, the stone carvers, the dream-chanting elders, there lived one without tribe or title, who brought nothing but an instrument made from bone. They called him Uru. Some said he had wandered in from the east, alone but smiling. Others claimed he was born from the belly of a cave, where stalactites dripped songs. He wore no animal skins, only woven grass. He spoke few words, and when he did, they fell like feathers, soft, slow, strange. But when he played, the hill held its breath. The flute was long, carved from the leg bone of a great bird, polished smooth, with holes not drilled, but burned. Its sound was unlike any the people knew. Not high and bright like reed pipes, nor deep like drums, but soft, breathy, as if the earth itself was remembering how to speak. At dawn, Oru would walk among the pillars of the circle, brushing his fingers along their carvings, humming to himself. He never stayed in one place. Some days, he played while sitting beside the fox stone. Other days, he lay flat between two columns, the flute rising from his chest like a reed in the marsh. And slowly, people began to return to the circle not just for offerings or ritual, but to listen. He never performed. He waited. If the wind was wrong, he said nothing. If the clouds hung too low, he walked away. But when the air held still and the birds quieted, he would lift the flute and begin. The music was not melody. It had no chorus, no rhythm. It moved like smoke. It bent the moment. Mothers swore their infants stopped crying. Hunters claimed they saw the shapes of ancient beasts flickering between stones. One night, after a long drought, he played into a bowl of still water, and the wind returned. Some believed he played the language of the animals. Others thought he summoned the stars. But Oru never explained. Instead, he began teaching, not how to play, but how to breathe. He taught them to exhale with intention, to pause between notes, to listen not to the sound but to what remained after. He said, the song lives between. Each pupil made their own flute, not from bird bone, but from what they could find, reeds, bark, clay. None sounded like Oru's. And he told them they weren't supposed to. One day, he vanished. No farewell, no sign. Only his footprints leading beyond the last pillar and down the hill. The people mourned, not with weeping, but with silence. They gathered, sat in a ring, and each took turns playing a single breath through their flutes. No melody, just presence. Then they buried a replica of his flute in the center of the circle, beneath the smooth stone. Not to preserve it, to let it return. Seasons turned. The circle was eventually buried. The pillars slept beneath the soil for thousands of years. But the wind remained. And those who now visit the ruins, archaeologists, wanderers, the curious, sometimes pause. Sometimes they stop walking. Because the wind changes. And just for a breath, it sounds like a flute, not loud, not sharp, but old. A note without a name. As if someone is still playing. Still listening.